Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell of Kentucky is stepping down from his leadership post in November, ending his history setting tenure as the longest serving Senate party leader. McConnell, who turned 82 this month, announced the decision in a speech on the Senate floor. One of the left's most underappreciated talents is to know when it's time to move on to life's next chapter. So I stand before you today to say that this will be my last term as Republican leader of the Senate, McConnell announced on the Senate floor shortly after noon Wednesday, catching many of his colleagues by surprise. McConnell said he plans to serve out the remainder of his term, which ends in January 2027. And will continue to work hard leading his conference through this year's election. I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. However, I will complete my job my colleagues have given me until we select a new leader in November and they take the helm next January, he said. McConnell said he began reevaluating his career plans after his sister-in-law Angela Chow died in a car accident earlier this month. When you lose a loved one, particularly at a young age, there's a certain introspection that accompanies the grieving process. Perhaps it is God's way of reminding you of your own life's journey to prioritize the impact of the world that we will be inevitably leave behind, he said, noting his recent birthday. I turned 82 last week. The end of my contributions are closer than I'd prefer. McConnell revealed his plans Wednesday morning to a small group of allies, several of whom attended the speech on the Senate floor. One of his closest friends, Senator Susan Collins, sat at her desk immediately behind McConnell while he spoke. Senate Republican Whip John Thune, former Senate GOP Whip John Cornyn, and Senator Lisa Murkowski were also spotted on the floor, solemnly listening to his remarks. Members of McConnell's staff stood at the back of the chamber to hear his emotional remarks. The veteran Kentucky lawmaker marveled at his remarkable political career that began when he was first elected to the Senate 40 years ago when he was in his early 40s. I have the honor of representing Kentucky in the Senate longer than anyone else in our state's history. I just never could have imagined that happening when I arrived here in 1984 at 42, he said, his voice full of emotion and his eyes rimmed with red. I'm filled with heartfelt gratitude and humility for the opportunity, he said. Collins stood up on the floor to thank McConnell for his service at the conclusion of his speech. I just want to very briefly recognize my good friend, the Republican leader, for his extraordinary service, not only to our caucus, but more importantly to the Senate as an institution in our country, Collins said. His tenure as leader will be remembered not just for its historical longevity, but also for his unparalleled devotion to this great institution which he has always defended. McConnell surpassed late Senate Majority Leader Mike Mansfield, Democrat of Montana, in January 2023 as the longest-serving Senate party leader in history. Okay, so let me just go through a little bit more of this. Anyways, when this news came out, people were on Twitter crying. They were in deep dissatisfaction at their longest-serving party leader for either side in the Senate retiring. There was a sense of disbelief. To a lot of people, McConnell has been the only party leader for the Republicans in the Senate that they've ever known. And many young people, many progressives, many conservatives, they all rallied together to sit back and shed tears at the loss of such a distinguished statesman in such a high-ranking position. In all seriousness, they're on there celebrating. This is not entirely surprising because we saw the writing on the wall when he had the freeze ups, like there was some kind of health issue going on there. So I think if he was feeling better, he probably would try to stave it out for another term, an eighth term, in the Senate altogether. But I think he's probably gotten some advice from his wife and from his staffers and from his campaign team that I think if you unless you want to die there like Feinstein, you probably should get out now. And he has, to his credit, whether you like him or not, and we already know what side of the spectrum I fall on when it comes to that question. But to his credit, he will go down as one of the most important, in my opinion, politicians of the 2010s, and certainly of the last 20 or 30 years in the Senate, because this is a man who, when he became Senate Majority Leader, set about much of the obstructionism that we have seen in the present day. Anything that Obama wanted to pass, if it was just a thing that Obama talked about, he blocked, he was against, he was opposed to. It didn't matter how moderate it was. It did, like, whether we're talking about all the Republicans voting against the ACA, or the refusal to even let Merrick Garland have a hearing. And in many ways, he is responsible for Roe v. Wade being overturned, because if he had allowed Garland to have a hearing, even if the Republicans controlled the Senate, there's a very good there is a possibility of a chance, not an entirely big one, but there's a chance that Garland or some other person that Obama could have put up afterward would have been confirmed, and then Trump would have only had two Supreme Court justices slots to fill, which means they wouldn't have had enough votes to overturn it. So he's been a very important part of recent American history, just from an objective standpoint, and that's why his decision to retire is something I still feel a need to report on, because he is, him and Pelosi, they are people that I think in 100 years will be talked about. Not in some great amazing way of like this is a master legislator, but McConnell has been successful in his efforts to obstruct Democratic proposals. I mean, even after the Obama era, you had the Green New Deal, and just anything that is left leaning, um, altogether. Like the Grim Reaper title was very appropriate for him, and I just wish we could have gotten him out of there back in either 2014 or 2020, when it looked like the Democrats were finally going to be competitive with him, and then it just turned out to be a bunch of trash. So, as far as his successor, they're talking about Thune and Cornyn and whatnot. I I don't think any of them are going to be as effective. Um, like one of the things about McConnell is because he was in the Senate for so long, he kind of has this personal relationship with a lot of the younger members, like the ones that joined before like 2013, and Cruz and the rest of them. So with when he's able to go up to somebody like Collins or Murkowski or whoever, it's a lot more believable. They're like, yeah, these people will side with him on something because they're personal friends. A lot of those like newer ones are just these careerists who don't stand for anything, and like on top of that, all seem to be at each other's throats. I mean, look at what happened, in the House with McCarthy getting ousted after what 10 months as Speaker. So I think we're not going to see anything like him for a very long time, if not ever again, as far as like a consistent, continuous leader for upwards of 15, 16, 17 years. You're not getting that. You'll see if Thune or Cornyn or one of them takes over, it'll be maybe like at a maximum 4 years before they switch to somebody else. I don't think the rest of these people are going to last as long. That's what I'm figuring. And really, I said before, I think if you wanted a younger person to be the leader and kind of like make the Republicans look not crazy, you probably would pick somebody like Joni Ernst from Iowa. Like I think if she were the leader, they could do a lot of the same crooked stuff, but it wouldn't look as crazy because she has this kind of like moderate tone. She's from this state that isn't really known for being, one side or the other. So that's who I would prefer they pick, but none of the options they're going to select are really good anyway. So it's kind of like who's the least awful out of this criminal lineup.